throughout the 80s and 90s, if you wanted 6x6, 2¼ square, medium format cameras, you really have a choice of two. There's the Bronica SQA series cameras, or there are the Hasselblad 500 series cameras. There were others available too, Rollei, Yashica. They all made 6x6 cameras, as did Mamiya, but really it was the Bronica and the Hasselblad that really led the market. Today I'm going to talk to you about the SQ series cameras. That's the SQ, SQA, SQAi. I'm going to quickly run through the differences and highlight things you need to check if you're buying secondhand. Okay, so Bronica SQ series cameras, three models. There was the original SQ introduced in 1980. That was replaced by the SQA. This is an SQA. The SQA has TTL metering via the TTL prism. The SQ camera didn't have that. The SQA also has a mirror lockup, which the SQ didn't have. The SQ was then replaced by the third model in the range, which was the SQAi. SQAi has a TTL flash facility, so there's a little socket there that you plug the Bronica TTL flash module into, which will allow you to meter for flash through the lens. The model before, the SQA, that just measured ambient light through the lens. Okay, so I'm going to run through the functionality. Fundamentally, the three cameras are very similar. On this side, you have the shutter speed dial there. That little button there is a battery check. Push that little button. There's a little red LED in the viewfinder that lights up. In front is the lens release. One important thing to note is you do have to have the camera wound on for the lens to come off. If the camera isn't cocked, then the lens will lock on the camera. Down here you have the back release. Dark slide needs to be in. Press the back release. Back hinges off. And just in front of the back release, just there, you have the cable release socket. When you're using the cable release, it's always a good idea to lock the mirror up. That's the mirror lockup. You have a normal position, you have an S position. The S position locks the mirror up for one exposure, and you have a C position. If you keep it to the C position, the camera will re-lock the mirror up after every exposure. So if you're taking a sequence of shots, stick it on the C position. If you're only taking a single shot with mirror locked up, stick it on the S position. That, as I said, is the multiple exposure. Now that one is important because at the moment you can see it's on. The reason it's on is that there's no film in the camera. If I put it to the normal position and I wind the camera on now, it doesn't work. You need a film in the camera to make the camera operate, but to fool it into thinking it's got a film in the back, just pull that around. That will now fire. So if you're testing the camera, or if you're just familiarizing yourself with the camera, stick the multiple exposure switch on, and that'll allow you to use it without a film in. So yeah, multiple exposure, mirror lockup. This button here that pushes down is the viewfinder release. Pull it down, viewfinder comes off like that. This is the standard waist level finder, which just folds up and you view from above like this. They also make a chimney finder, which is fixed in the up position with a Dr. correction viewer here, so you'd use it like that. They also make 90 and 45 degree prisms. If you're using the 90 degree prisms, you have to hold it up here, which is a little bit awkward. They do make something called a speed grip, which is quite a chunky right hand grip that goes here. Definitely recommended if you're using the 90 degree prism. They also later on introduced the 45 degree prism, which allows you to view at this angle, which is a lot more comfortable. I'd recommend the 45 degree prism if you can find one. If you can't and you go for the 90 degree prism, then buy the speed grip as well, because that is very handy. As I said, it's a chunky L bracket that allows you to actually advance the film by with your thumb on the grip as well, which is a really good feature. Okay, so that's the viewfinder. Just looking at the back, dark slide. Obviously that has to be in if you want to take it off the camera. As I said earlier, press that little button there, back comes off. ASA dial on the top. With the AI versions I mentioned, it's on the back. Here you have a film memo holder, so if you're loading FP4, you can tear the little top off the carton and just slide it in there to remind you what's in there. Loading is fairly straightforward. You just squeeze there to get into the back. I'll upload a link to a video I did that shows you how to load these. Really straightforward, but it's useful to look at. And of course, always with these things, the best thing to do is just to practice. So insert goes back in there, that closes up, back hinges on via these two little slots there. When you're buying these secondhand, always do check the back of the camera very carefully, because this really will show you how much wear the camera's had. So put the back on, you just hinge, if I can get it positioned, hinge like that, and it clicks in at the bottom. Okay, so that's the back. Just look at the bottom of the camera for a second. That's the battery chamber there. It takes a PX28 cell. It is an electronically controlled shutter, so you do need a battery, and obviously a working battery, for the shutter timing to work. So it does work without a battery, but it'll fire on the single mechanical speed, and the single mechanical speed is 1/500th of a second. So if you find yourself shooting away using half a second, you can hear it opening and closing. If it suddenly starts doing this, just a single click, you know that's now reverted to the mechanical top speed, the 1/500th of a second, so your battery is getting weak. Although, as I said, you do actually have the battery check as well. With the battery check, I'd always recommend holding it in for about 8 seconds, 8 or 10 seconds. Just make sure that the little LED, I'm not sure if you can actually see that, the little LED in there stays strong for 8 seconds. If it begins to dim, then it's a sign that the battery is getting a little bit weak. So at that point, change the battery. One of the, I think, quite justifiable criticisms of this camera is if you're working at, say, a 60th or 30th, you can't really hear that it's not firing. And if your battery suddenly fails, you can carry on taking pictures quite happily like this, not an issue, except you're not firing on a 30th of a second, you're actually firing on a 500th of a second. There's no indication to tell you that the battery is dead, unless, as I said, you're using it on the very slow speeds, in which case you'll spot the tone change in the shutter, or you proactively check through the battery check switch. So do be aware of that. Okay, so moving on to the lens. As I said, to take the lens off, the camera does have to be cocked. So I've just fired the camera, that's not cocked. So the button there now won't, excuse me, the button there now won't release. So lens stays on. If I wind it on, cocks the camera, opens the shutter, mirror in the camera comes down, baffles come down, light, film is protected. So now when I take the lens off, there's no issue with film being fogged. These have a leaf shutter rather in the lens. So the reason for that quite convoluted interlock is that you don't want to be in a position where the shutter on the lens is closed and you then take the lens with shutter off the camera, because obviously you'll fog the film. So the camera does need to bring the mirror down with the various light baffles just to make the body light tight, so you can then take the lens off the camera. Controls on the lens fairly straightforward. You've got the aperture just there. You've got a shutter there. If you're looking at these secondhand, just make sure they're both smooth. Make sure the aperture shuts down. There's a depth of field preview button there. So just look through the lens and just make sure the aperture is shutting down. The apertures on these can be a little bit sticky sometimes. Also, if you're buying one of these secondhand, just have a very careful look through it to make sure there's no misting or fungus inside. Again, I'll post a link just describing how to spot fungus. 15 years ago, Bronica lenses never suffered from fungus. In the last 3 or 4 years, as they've got older, it's become a lot more of an issue. So you really should check the glass very carefully if you're buying one of these things secondhand. Check the front and the back for scratches. A few little marks won't make a difference, but will affect the value. But the most important thing is just to make sure there's no fungus inside. So put the lens back on. You've got the little red dot there, the orange dot there. Just align the two, and away you go. Shutter release on the front. And just there is a lock. So turn the collar when it's found on. Turn the collar, and the lock will prevent accidental activation of the shutter. Okay, so that's the lens, that's the body, that's the viewfinder, that's the back. I've just run through a few other things to check if you are buying second-hand. Obviously check the lens as I mentioned. Just check it cosmetically, just make sure it hasn't been heavily used. As I said, check the back of the body. You can tell how much use it's had just by looking at how much the back has been clipped on and off the camera. A few signs of wear is inevitable, really, given the age of the camera. You know, the Bronica went out of business in early 2000s, I think 2003, 2004. So the earliest camera, so the youngest camera you're going to find is going to be 20 odd years old. So do check them very carefully if you're buying them second hand. Check the glass, check the shutter. Do make sure that the shutter timing is working. Set it to half a second or maybe a quarter of a second might be better. Take the dark slide out, put the multiple exposure on as I mentioned, and just fire it. You can hear the shutter opening and closing. That's what it should be doing. Sometimes with these cameras, if the electronic timing is failing, what you'll find is if you fire it a few times, it'll suddenly, for no reason, revert to the mechanical speed. As I mentioned, that's 1/500th. So fire it over and over on a quarter of a second, and make sure it's firing on a quarter of a second. So it's going click, 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 click each time. If it suddenly goes click, like that, it's reverted to the mechanical speed of 1/500th. If that happens, that is a sign that the timing on the body is failing. Walk away from the camera. These are great cameras, they're very reliable, but if the electronics go, they can't be fixed. The spare's no longer available. So that's the one test that you must do. Obviously put a film through, that's great. That confirms that a lot of the other functions are working. But do just check the shutter like this. Fire it 20 times, fire it 30 times. Make sure you can hear that click, click every time. Click, click every time. When you've got it set down to a quarter of a second or an eighth of a second, just set it to a speed where you can hear that the shutter is opening and closing. So you know the electric timing on the shutter timing is doing exactly what it should be. Okay, well I hope that's useful. If you have any questions, please stick them in the boxes below. Otherwise, please subscribe and like, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.